The $50 bill hit my cheek so hard the corner scraped my skin. But what stunned me wasn't the pain, it was the silence that followed. Christmas morning, snow thick against the windows, lights still blinking on the tree, and my father sat there at the kitchen table like a judge delivering a final sentence. "Take it," he said. "It's all you'll ever get from me." His voice wasn't loud, it was worse than loud. Cold, practiced, like he'd been rehearsing those words for years. I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I just stared at the crumpled green bill on the hardwood floor and realized something bone deep and terrifyingly clear. This wasn't the beginning of a fight. This was the end of one. And the moment that truth settled into my chest, I felt calm. Calm in a way I'd never felt in 18 years under his roof. When I finally bent down to pick up the bill, his eyes narrowed, waiting for me to break. Instead, I smiled. A slow, quiet smile that made him shift back in his chair, because he had no idea what I was about to hand him. I hadn't slept much the night before. Snowstorms always made the house feel colder, like the walls pulled inward. I woke before sunrise, sat on the edge of my bed, and listened to the emptiness of Maple Hill Drive. No Christmas music, no laughter, no warmth drifting from downstairs the way I used to imagine a real family might sound. My 18th birthday had landed on Christmas Day, not that anyone in this house cared. They never baked a cake or hung a banner or even remembered until they saw the date on paperwork. But something about waking up 18, it felt like a door cracking open. A door I'd been pushing against since childhood. I dressed slowly, tugging on the same navy sweater I'd worn last year and the year before that. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Tired eyes, hair pulled into a loose braid, shoulders tense like I was bracing for another ordinary day of being ignored. Except today wasn't ordinary. I felt it humming beneath my ribs, steady and sure. The sealed envelope sat on my dresser where it had lived for 4 years, untouched, unopened, waiting. I slid it into my jacket pocket before heading downstairs. The smell of burnt coffee hit me first. Harold sat at the table in his gray sweater, newspaper folded beside him, a man who believed every corner of the world owed him something. Jenna stood at the sink, rinsing a mug, shoulders drawn in tight. Noah hovered near the tree, scrolling on his phone, pretending not to notice the tension. No one said, "Merry Christmas." No one said, "Happy birthday." I didn't expect them to. Harold didn't look up until I reached for a glass. Then he folded the newspaper very slowly, like a ritual. "Sit," he said. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face still. I pulled out the chair across from him and lowered myself into it. Jenna dried her hands on a towel, watching from the corner. Noah paused his scrolling but kept his head down. Harold leaned his elbows on the table and studied me, as if he was evaluating a stranger. And maybe he always had. Maybe in his mind, I'd never belonged to him one single day. "You turn 18 today," he said. "That means my obligation ends." My stomach tightened, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. His mouth twitched like he wanted me to speak, to defend myself, to beg. But I stayed quiet. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out the 50. A single crisp bill, a symbol, a message. An insult wrapped in legal technicality. He didn't hand it to me, he flicked his wrist and threw it. It hit me so fast I barely saw it move. The impact stung, but I didn't blink. The bill fluttered to the floor at my feet, landing half-folded like a dropped feather. "There," Harold said. "Consider that your final support. Pack your things. Be gone by noon." Jenna gasped softly. Noah lifted his head, eyes wide. But no one said anything. Not really. In this house, Harold's word was law, and I'd spent a lifetime learning what happened to anyone who challenged it. I leaned down, picked up the 50, and smoothed the crease with my thumb. I looked at Harold, really looked at him, and saw something I had never seen before. Fear, small, quick, but real. "I know," I said quietly. He frowned. "Know what?" I slipped my hand into my jacket and pulled out the envelope, cream-colored, heavy, sealed with the rose-shaped wax my mother always used. The color drained slightly from his face. "What is that?" he snapped. "Something you were never meant to read," I said, placing it gently on the table between us. "But you will." His jaw clenched. I pushed the envelope toward him with 2 fingers. "Merry Christmas," I said, and "Happy Ending." He didn't touch it at first. Harold didn't like surprises, only control. He eyed the seal like it was a bomb. "Open it," I said. Jenna's voice trembled. "Lydia, maybe this isn't... It's time," I said softly. Harold broke the seal with his thumb, tearing through the wax. His hands weren't steady anymore. He unfolded the letter. I watched his eyes move across the page, watched the lines in his forehead deepen, watched sweat begin to gather along his hairline. I knew each sentence he was reading. I'd memorized them years ago. I watched his shoulders tense, I watched his nostrils flare, and then I watched the exact second he realized he could no longer hide from the truth. "No," he whispered. "No, this is impossible." "It's not," I said. He looked up, and for the first time in my life, Harold Mercer wasn't angry. He was terrified. "How long?" His voice cracked. "How long have you known?" 2 years. His face twisted. "You dug this up? You think this changes anything? You think finding that man—" I leaned back in my chair, folded the $50 bill in half, and tucked it into my pocket. "My real father," I said, letting the words land gently, "is waiting outside." Noah's eyes shot to the window. Jenna inhaled sharply. Harold whipped his head around so fast his chair scraped the floor. He stared out through the frost-rimmed glass. He froze. Because parked across the street, engine running, headlights cutting through the snow, was a black SUV he knew very well. A man stepped out, tall, composed, silver hair catching the winter sun. His coat billowed in the cold wind. He shut the door calmly, like a man who had nothing to fear. Damien Hartwell. Harold's face drained to chalk. "No," he whispered again. "Not him. Not now." I stood from the table, sliding my chair back with a steady scrape. "You wanted me gone," I said. "I'm leaving." Harold lunged for the envelope, gripping it with shaking hands. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly." "No, you don't," he shouted, slamming the table with his fist. "You're about to ruin everything." Behind him, Jenna flinched. Noah looked ready to cry. But I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I'd screamed enough inside my own head for years. This moment didn't need volume. It needed truth. I walked to the front door, my boots silent on the wood. Through the glass, I saw Damien straighten when he spotted me. His breath fogged in the air, but he didn't move forward. He waited, like he'd promised he would. I wrapped my fingers around the doorknob, paused, turned back one last time. Harold stood there trembling, the letter shaking in his hand, the truth unraveling everything he'd built on fear and lies. "Goodbye," I said. And I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. Snowflakes drifted into the hallway, my lungs filled with the first real breath I'd taken in years. Damien stepped forward. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. I nodded. Behind me, Harold shouted something. My name, maybe, or a final attempt at control, but I didn't turn back. I walked down the steps, each one lighter than the last, and reached the SUV. As Damien opened the passenger door for me, he looked over my shoulder into the house. His expression didn't change, but his voice had steel in it. "He shouldn't have touched your trust fund." I slid into the seat. The door closed. The world outside muffled. Damien put the car in drive. And for the first time on any Christmas of my life, I felt free. I was 8 years old the first time I realized Christmas didn't mean the same thing in our house that it seemed to mean everywhere else. Other kids came back from winter break talking about fuzzy pajamas, family dinners, and staying up late to decorate the tree. My memory of that holiday was my mother sitting alone on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her knees, staring out the window as snow piled on the railing. I remembered thinking she looked like someone waiting for a bus that would never come. The signs always started in December. Mom would grow quieter, retreating into herself, humming soft Spanish lullabies under her breath while folding laundry or packing my school lunch. She tried to hide it, but even at 8, I could hear something in her voice. Something tired, something lonely. I didn't understand it then, not fully. But now, thinking back, I know exactly why winters broke her. That year, my class had a holiday recital at Pinewood Elementary. I had practiced my little piano piece for weeks, copying the fingering out of a workbook until the lines blurred. Mom sat with me every evening, tapping the beat on my shoulder, whispering, "Slow, Carino, slow. Your hands are rushing because your heart is rushing." She said it with a smile, even on nights her eyes were rimmed with red. The morning of the recital, she braided my hair herself. She wasn't great at it, one side always hung a little lower, but she leaned in close and kissed my cheek after tying the last ribbon. "You look beautiful," she said. "Just like your abuela." I remember asking, "Is he coming today?" And the smile faltered. Just for half a second. Then she nodded with a softness that wasn't quite a yes. She meant Harold. He wasn't my father, though back then I thought he was. But he filled the father-shaped space in the household with the heaviness of a locked door. When he walked into a room, Mom would fold her arms, straighten her posture, and go quiet. The air changed around him like a shift in barometric pressure. That afternoon, when I walked onto the little auditorium stage in my sequined holiday dress, the seat beside Mom was empty. A folded jacket she'd placed there earlier remained untouched. She kept glancing at the door every time the hinges creaked. By the time my turn came to play, the jacket had become a monument to disappointment. I performed anyway. I sat on the piano bench with my feet dangling and played each note exactly the way I'd practiced. When I finished, the parents clapped politely. Mom clapped louder, but even as her smile stretched wide, her chin trembled. After the show, she met me in the hallway and wrapped her arms around me so tightly I couldn't breathe. "You did so well," she whispered into my hair. "You were the best one." I should have just hugged her back and let that be enough. But I was a child. I still believed answers were simple if you only asked the right way. "Why doesn't he come to my stuff?" I asked. Mom didn't answer. She only pressed her cheek to the top of my head. Her silence was heavier than any explanation. I felt it then, the sense that something about me was different. Something that made Harold choose absence over presence. That night, after Mom tucked me into bed, I heard voices drifting up from the kitchen. It wasn't the usual murmuring behind closed doors. It was sharper. Frayed. I slipped out from under my covers and crept to the top of the stairs, holding onto the banister with both hands as I leaned forward to listen. "You promised," Mom said. Her voice broke on the word. "I promised to try," Harold shot back. "And I have, for years. Don't act like I owe her anything." "She's a child. She loves you." "She's not my child." The words hit like a slap even from across the house. "Every time I look at her, I see the mistake you made. I see him." Mom inhaled sharply like she'd been punched. "Please, Harold, she's innocent in all of this." There was a long silence. Then Harold said, "The day she turns 18, she's out of my house. I'm done pretending." I didn't breathe, not for several seconds. The banister felt like it was slipping out of my hands. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough to know something in my life was built on a crack, something that could snap open without warning. Mom didn't know I'd heard. She never asked why I'd cried myself to sleep that night. She probably thought it was just nerves from the recital. What she didn't know was that, after hearing Harold's voice, something inside me shifted. I stopped waiting for him to show up at my school events. I stopped asking why Noah, who was younger than me, got whispered encouragements, new cleats every season, and a father's arm around his shoulder. It wasn't jealousy. It was clarity. A clarity that came too early for an 8-year-old. The years that followed were a lesson in quiet expectations. For Noah's 10th birthday, they rented out a trampoline park, invited 30 kids, ordered pizza and custom cookies with his team number on them. When my birthday came around 2 months later, Mom made a small chocolate cake at home. I loved that cake. It tasted like comfort. Like her. But I still noticed how Harold didn't show up in the kitchen until it was time to eat, and even then he left halfway through for a phone call. The difference wasn't just emotional, it was measurable. You could track it like a pattern on graph paper. School supply lists came home in August. Noah's bag would be packed in 2 days, filled with fresh binders, name-labeled water bottles, and a collapsible lunchbox with a little soccer ball stitched on the corner. Mine was filled in pieces. One binder from the dollar aisle, last year's pencils sharpened down to nubs, and an old lunchbox with the zipper that snagged. I never complained. Complaints made Harold cold. Complaints made Mom sad. So I swallowed everything, folded it up like a note, and tucked it somewhere inside my chest. The summer I turned 12 was when things truly changed. Mom started getting sick more often. At first it was just fatigue, then bruises that lingered, then fevers that didn't break. The day she collapsed while carrying laundry up the stairs, Harold blamed the heat. At the hospital, I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, while the machines beeped steadily around us. When the doctor said the words lymphoma, I didn't understand the full meaning, but I understood the tone. It sounded like a door slamming. Harold didn't come to the hospital until hours later. He stood near the foot of the bed, checking his watch, irritated more than worried. When the doctor explained the treatment plan, he asked only one question. "And how much is this going to cost?" Mom didn't cry then. She waited until he stepped out into the hallway, then turned away from me and pressed the heel of her palm against her mouth to muffle the sound. That was when I started noticing everything. How Harold flinched whenever Mom coughed, how he avoided looking at her hands when they trembled, how Jenna tried to act normal but couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. How Noah, even younger than me, sensed something was wrong but didn't have a name for it. And how Mom, even while fighting something that drained the color from her skin, still found it in her to touch my cheek every night and whisper, "I'm here, I'm here." I clung to that. After months of treatment, after weeks of nights when I fell asleep on the plastic couch beside her bed, Mom asked the nurses for privacy. It was quiet except for the hum of the IV pump. She took my hand and folded my fingers gently around hers. "There's something you need to know," she said. Her voice was thin, but her grip was strong. "Not today, not this year, but one day." I stared at her, wide-eyed, afraid she was about to tell me she was dying. Instead, she whispered, "I left you something. When the time is right, you'll understand everything." I asked what it was. She just shook her head. 16, she said. "On your 16th birthday." I didn't understand. I didn't want to. I just wanted her to get better. But less than a year later, she was gone. The morning after her funeral, Harold threw away her scarves. Jenna boxed up her books. They nearly tossed the small rose-engraved wooden box she kept on her dresser, until I grabbed it and clutched it to my chest. "This is mine," I said, voice shaking. Harold shrugged. "It's just junk." Maybe to him, but to me it was a promise. I hid the box behind my winter coats in the closet and guarded it like treasure. I didn't open it, I didn't peek. Not once. I waited like Mom asked me to. 16. 4 years felt like a lifetime. And when the day finally came, when I turned 16, and Harold was at work, and Noah was at soccer practice, and Jenna was at a friend's house, I pulled the box down from the shelf with trembling hands. The lid creaked open, and inside was the truth my mother had guarded until her last breath. But that's another part of the story, the part that changed everything, the part that led me 2 years later to stand up from that kitchen table on Christmas morning, look Harold in the eye, and finally walk out of his house without fear. I didn't mean to remember everything so clearly, but grief has a way of preserving certain moments like glass. Fragile, cold, impossible to throw away. Even now, years later, I can still see my mother's face the spring she first got sick. The tiny crease between her eyebrows when she thought no one was watching. She hid it well around everyone else, even around Harold, but with me she slipped sometimes. Just enough for an 8-year-old girl to know something was wrong without understanding what. The first real sign came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Mom was folding laundry on the couch, humming the same lullaby she always sang when she wanted to comfort herself. I was coloring at the coffee table. When she reached for a blanket, her hand suddenly shook so hard she dropped it. I ran to pick it up for her, and she smiled like nothing happened, too quickly, too brightly. "Just tired, Cariño," she said. "A long week." But it was only Tuesday. A week later, she fainted. I was in the kitchen doing homework when I heard a soft thud from upstairs. Nothing loud, just the sound of someone sinking into the floor. I called out, "Mom?" But she didn't answer. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, she was lying in the hallway, breathing but pale, her hair fanned out like a dark halo on the hardwood. My little hands shook as I ran for the neighbor's house. Mrs. Kellerman rushed over, called 911, and knelt by my mother, brushing her hair from her forehead. When the ambulance doors closed, I remember looking back toward our house and seeing Harold's car parked in the driveway. He hadn't come outside. He hadn't even opened the door. At the hospital, I sat beside Mom's bed on a plastic chair that squeaked every time I shifted. Machines beeped softly. Nurses whispered. My mother's skin looked gray under the fluorescent lights. I kept waiting for Harold to show up, to put a hand on her shoulder, to ask if she was okay. He came 3 hours later. He didn't touch her. He didn't ask what happened. He just stood at the foot of the bed and said, "How much is this going to cost?" I didn't know much about illness back then, but I knew what fear looked like. And I knew what indifference sounded like too. They diagnosed her with early-stage lymphoma. I didn't know the word, but I saw the worry ripple across her face. When the doctor asked if she had support at home, she smiled politely and said yes. She lied for him. She always lied for him. Over the following months, I became her shadow. Every Wednesday morning, we sat together in a small room at Salem General with the smell of disinfectant in the air. She wrapped a scarf around her head to hide the thinning hair, but to me, she still looked beautiful. I did my homework on a tray table while she read or dozed. Harold never came, not once. He always had a meeting, a deadline, important calls. Funny how Noah's soccer tournaments never seemed to conflict with any of that. One afternoon, during one of Mom's treatments, I caught Harold's name in a whispered conversation between 2 nurses. "He didn't sign the insurance authorization," one said quietly. "She had to do it herself." I didn't understand the meaning, but the tone made something tighten inside me. At home, everything grew tense in small, invisible ways. Mom cooked less, slept more, and moved with careful slowness. Jenna tried her best to help, but she had Noah and the house to manage. I stayed close to Mom, hovering like a tiny guard dog, worried she might collapse again. One night, I woke thirsty and crept downstairs for water. The hallway light was on, and voices drifted from the kitchen. I froze halfway down the staircase. Harold's voice was low, sharp. "I can't do this, Marisol. I can't pretend forever." Mom's voice trembled. "She's a child." "She's not my child. She never was." The words hit me like a punch. I clutched the railing so tightly it left lines on my palm. Harold kept going. "Every time I look at her, I see the mistake you made. You should have told me before we married, but you didn't, and now I'm stuck. But once she's 18, I'm done." My mother sobbed, soft and broken, the kind of sound I'd never heard from her before. I turned and ran back upstairs before they could hear me, crawled into bed and cried silently into my pillow. I told myself Harold was angry and didn't mean it. I told myself Mom loved me, so everything would be okay. I told myself a lot of things to fall asleep again, but something inside me changed. Childhood has a way of ending quietly, without ceremony. The next year, Mom deteriorated faster than anyone predicted. The bruises darkened, the fevers worsened. The laughter that once filled our kitchen vanished. She hid it as long as she could with scarves and cardigans and forced smiles, but cancer is relentless. By then, I had learned not to ask Harold for anything. Every request, no matter how small, seemed to irritate him. When Noah needed new soccer gear, Harold drove him across town without hesitation. When I needed a new pair of shoes because mine had holes, he told Mom, "She can wait." I stopped asking altogether. But Mom didn't stop fighting. Even on her worst days, she'd ask me to sit beside her bed and read aloud from her old collection of poetry. I'd stumble over the Spanish words, and she'd smile faintly, correcting my accent. A few days before she died, she asked the nurses to give us privacy. The room was quiet except for the steady wheeze of the oxygen machine. Mom took my hand, her fingers thin and cool. "There's a letter," she whispered, "in my jewelry box, the wooden one with the rose on the lid." I nodded, tears already burning behind my eyes. "Don't open it until you're 16. "Why?" My voice cracked. "Why do I have to wait?" Her eyes softened with sorrow. "Because at 16 you'll be old enough to understand, strong enough to carry it." I didn't know what it was. I didn't want to know. I just wanted her to stay. I squeezed her hand, terrified that if I let go, she'd slip away completely. She died 3 days later. The house fell silent in a way that didn't feel like mourning. It felt like erasure. Harold didn't speak at the funeral except to tell the pastor it should be simple and short. Jenna cried quietly beside me. Noah held my hand the whole time, confused and scared. Harold didn't shed a tear. As soon as we got home, he told Jenna, "Pack up her things." Just like that, no ceremony, no hesitation. I ran to Mom's room and locked the door, my heart thudding against my ribs. Her scarves still hung on the chair. Her perfume still lingered in the air. The wooden jewelry box was on the dresser. I grabbed it and held it to my chest as if holding her again. Jenna knocked softly. "Sweetheart, Harold wants everything." "This is mine," I said through the door. "This stays with me." When I came out, Harold glanced at the box in my arms. "It's just junk," he muttered, turning away. But it wasn't. It was the last piece of my mother, and inside it, the last words she'd ever write to me. I hid the box behind my winter coats, and I waited. 4 years. 4 long years of silence, of being careful, of learning how to live in a house where my presence irritated the man who raised me. Jenna tried to be kind, but kindness built on fear is fragile. Noah grew older, less clingy, more focused on soccer. Harold grew colder. Through it all, the box remained untouched, until my 16th birthday. I remember the quiet of that morning, the muffled rain against the siding, the way the house felt emptier than usual because Jenna and Harold had taken Noah to a tournament. I sat cross-legged on my bed with the box in my lap, my breath trembling. The lid opened with a soft click. There were several things inside, small, ordinary, but arranged with care. A thin silver necklace, a USB with a faint scratch on it, a folded slip of paper, and beneath them all, the envelope with my name in my mother's handwriting. I held it for a long moment, running my fingers over the letters. Athena. Inside the envelope was a letter that would change everything. My identity, my history, my understanding of why Harold had always held me at a distance. But that truth wasn't just about the past. It was the first step toward the day I would stand at the kitchen table at 18, lift my chin, and walk away from the only home I'd ever known. That day didn't start with a $50 bill. It started with a mother's whisper, "When the time is right, you'll understand." I waited 4 years to open that box, 4 years to keep a promise I barely understood. But on the morning of my 16th birthday, with the rain carving silver streaks down the window and the house finally empty, I knew the time had come. The wooden lid creaked open like it had been holding its breath. My fingers shook, not from fear exactly, but from something heavier. Anticipation, maybe. or the quiet dread of realizing that the truth doesn't always feel like freedom. Sometimes it feels like stepping off a ledge and trusting your feet to find ground. The envelope lay on top, tucked beneath a silver chain and a USB drive. My name was written in my mother's handwriting, soft loops, steady strokes, the kind of lettering she used only when something mattered. I held it to my chest before opening it, the way you brace yourself before diving into cold water. When I slid the letter out, the scent of her perfume clung faintly to the paper. I inhaled once, deeply, then began to read. My darling Lydia, if you're reading this, I'm gone. That line alone sent a tremor through me. My eyes blurred, but I blinked hard and kept going. You are 16 now, old enough to understand the truth I couldn't bear to tell you when I was alive. I need you to know that you were never a mistake, never a burden, never the reason for my pain. You are the greatest joy of my life. My throat tightened. I pressed a hand over my mouth, afraid I might sob and ruin the pages before I could finish. The next part shattered everything I thought I knew. Harold is not your biological father. I reread the sentence 3 times, holding the paper closer. The world didn't tilt or spin, but something inside me cracked open. It wasn't shock. Deep down, I think I always knew there was something different about me, some invisible line drawn between myself and everyone else in that house. But seeing the truth in ink, my mother's ink, was something else entirely. The letter continued. Before I met Harold, there was someone else, someone I loved. His name was Damien Hartwell. I whispered the name aloud in my small bedroom, where the peeling wallpaper had overheard so many whispered dreams I never dared speak. Damien Hartwell. A name that sounded carved from stone. We were young, my mother wrote. We were foolish. He was promised to someone else, pressured by his family to climb higher, be more, marry well. When he left, I thought it was the end of our story. I didn't know I was carrying you. I paused, staring at the stroke where her pen had pressed deeper into the page. A moment of hesitation she could never erase. I chose not to tell him. I didn't want to break apart the life he was building. By the time I realized he deserved to know, you were 3, and Harold had already discovered the truth. The room seemed to tilt then. Harold knew. All those years of cold stares, clipped words, the way he looked at me like I was a stain he couldn't scrub out of the carpet. It wasn't just cruelty. It was resentment. I kept reading, even as my hands grew numb. He stayed with me, but not for love, not for you. He stayed because he feared the embarrassment. I thought I could protect you by keeping silent, by making our home stable. I was wrong, and I am sorry for every moment he made you feel unloved. I wiped my cheek with the back of my sleeve and forced myself forward. I have left instructions with a lawyer in case you ever need help. There is more you should know, but not from me. You are old enough now to find the truth. When you're ready, reach out. She ended the letter with her usual sign-off. All my love, forever. I folded the paper with shaking fingers and pressed it to my forehead, like maybe I could absorb her strength through the ink. But there was more in the box. I picked up the USB drive next. It was scratched on one side as if someone had tried to pry it open, or tear it apart. I slipped it into my laptop and waited as the screen flickered to life. There were 3 folders. The first, insurance. The second, Marisol personal. The third, for Lydia. My heart thudded. I opened for Lydia first. It held photos, dozens of them. Pictures of my mother when she was young, smiling on a boat, sitting at a desk with color swatches spread out, laughing with someone whose face was always just out of frame. In one, I saw a man's shoulder in a well-tailored jacket. In another, a hand resting near hers, a watch gleaming under sunlit glass. Every hint pointed toward him, Damien, but never enough to identify. Then I clicked on the lone document in the folder, a draft email dated years before my mother fell sick. To whom it may concern, it began, but the text quickly grew personal. Harold already knows. I'm scared. If anything happens to me. The rest was blank. Deleted, cut, interrupted. I swallowed hard. The second folder, Marisol Personal, held scanned receipts and appointment notes from the hospital. But something else caught my eye. A file labeled Education Trust. When I opened it, a spreadsheet filled the screen. At the top, Lydia Rivera, Education Fund. Initial deposit, $62,000. My eyes widened. I had no idea. My mother had saved for my future even when she could barely afford medication, even when she was dying. But the deposits stopped the year she passed, and the withdrawals began. Small at first, $400, $250, $300, then bigger amounts, $200 on $800, $2,000. I scrolled to the bottom of the sheet. Remaining balance, $9,800. My chest tightened until breathing felt impossible. I whispered the words aloud, as if saying them would make them less devastating. He took it. Harold had drained the trust fund. The fund meant for my college, my future, my independence. He had used my mother's sacrifice for... what? New cleats for Noah? A vacation I never got to join? Bills he didn't want to pay? Anger flooded me so fast it felt like heat rising from my skin. The third folder, Insurance, was the smallest, but the most unsettling. A scanned letter from an insurance company about a life policy my mother had held. She'd named me a beneficiary, a policy Harold had managed after her death, a policy he'd cashed out within months. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling so violently I had to press them between my knees to steady them. Rain tapped the window. The house groaned as it settled. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked and fell silent again. I was 16 years old, sitting alone with a truth too heavy for my small bedroom. My mother had loved me with a fierceness Harold could never understand. She'd tried to protect me. She'd tried to give me a future even when she knew her own was running out. And Harold, the man I had called Dad, had known I wasn't his, had resented me for it, had stolen from me, had planned to cast me out the moment he could. I pressed my forehead to my knees and let myself cry, soft and shaking, the way I had at 8 years old when I heard my mother's sobs downstairs. But grief changed when you grew older. At 16, it wasn't just sadness. It was clarity. It was rage. It was resolve. When the tears dried, I sat up straighter. I lifted the letter again, tracing the curve of my mother's signature. "You're strong enough now," she had written. And she was right. I wasn't the same girl who hid on the staircase while Harold called me a mistake. I wasn't the quiet child who accepted every slight, every cold shoulder, every half-empty plate. I was 16. And I finally knew who I was. Not Harold's burden, not his responsibility, not his lie to maintain. I was Marisol's daughter, and somewhere out there, I was also the daughter of a man named Damien Hartwell. I didn't know yet if he would care. I didn't know if reaching out would break something or fix it. But I knew one thing clearly, powerfully. I had the truth. And the truth was the beginning of everything that would follow. At 16, the story I'd been given fell apart, so the real one could begin. I didn't reach out to him right away. For weeks after opening the box, I carried my mother's letter folded inside my notebook, the paper worn soft from how many times I touched it, reread it, memorized every curve of her handwriting. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, waiting until I felt brave enough, waiting until the grief stopped crushing my ribs. But the truth was simpler. I was terrified. Terrified of being rejected. Terrified of being unwanted by 2 fathers instead of 1. Terrified of confirming the fear I'd carried since childhood, that I was the problem. So I waited. For months. Life at home didn't change. If anything, it sharpened. Harold became more irritated by my presence, more precise with his criticisms, more dismissive of anything involving me. Jenna tried to stay neutral, but neutrality is a choice, and choices have consequences. Noah grew busier with soccer and friends, and I didn't blame him. He was a kid, just trying to survive the orbit of our family without getting pulled into the dark center where Harold's resentment lived. I tried to focus on school, on grades, on a future that felt like a thin thread I was trying to keep from snapping. The trust fund was nearly gone. College felt like a dream for other people, not for me. But every night, when the house settled and the shadows stretched across my bedroom walls, I would take out the letter and read my mother's words again. "You are old enough now to find the truth." And eventually, the fear felt smaller than the need. Smaller than the ache. Smaller than the question that refused to leave me alone. Who was he? And did he ever think of me? The search began on a rainy Saturday afternoon, while Harold and Jenna were out furniture shopping and Noah had a game. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the same chair where years later, Harold would throw a $50 bill in my face. The air smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. I typed Damien Hartwell Salem into the search bar. The results flooded the screen. I hadn't expected him to be someone important. I'd imagined a quiet man in a small town, maybe working in a bookstore or teaching somewhere. Someone kind-looking, someone normal. But Damien Hartwell was anything but ordinary. Article after article described him as a high-impact investor, real estate power figure, one of the region's most influential developers. He sat on boards, he funded scholarships, he donated to hospitals and environmental causes. There was a photo of him standing at a ribbon cutting, tall and composed, his suit sharp and immaculate, silver hair catching the light. His eyes were piercing gray. My eyes. My breath hitched. I zoomed in on the photo. The shape of his jawline, the set of his brows. My face existed there, in his, in ways I had ignored until now. Scrolling further, I found a business profile. He lived 2 towns over, 20 minutes away, a world apart. My hands trembled as I clicked on his company's website. There was a simple Contact Us section, a general email, and a phone number for the front office. But that wasn't enough. I didn't want to leave a voicemail with a receptionist. I didn't want to write a message that would get lost in a corporate inbox. I needed something real. I clicked on his personal page. There was a mailing address for correspondence, a mailing address, a handwritten letter. It felt like the only right way. I closed my laptop and went upstairs to find a pen and paper. I sat on my bed, the house quiet except for the hum of the furnace, and stared at the blank page for almost half an hour. What did you say to the man who didn't know you existed? What did you say to the man who changed the course of your life without ever meeting you? In the end, I kept it simple. My name. My mother's name. A brief summary of the truth she left behind. A request, gentle, hesitant, for a DNA test. And a line I rewrote over and over until it felt right. I don't want anything from you except the truth. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. I didn't mail it that day, or the next. It sat in my desk drawer for 3 weeks, a small white square that terrified me every time I saw it. But finally, one Friday morning, after Harold had snapped at me for taking too long to make toast, and Jenna had sighed heavily when I asked her if I could stay after school for tutoring, I walked to the mailbox at the end of our street. The sky was pale blue. The air smelled like frost. My fingers were numb. I pushed the letter through the slot. It clinked softly as it fell. And something inside me fell with it. Fear, maybe. Or the illusion that my life was fixed and unmoving. It took 18 days for him to respond. 18 days of checking the mailbox the moment I got home from school. 18 days of imagining every possible outcome. Anger, disbelief, silence. 18 days of Harold growing suspicious because I kept darting outside like a startled deer. On the 18th day, a letter appeared. Thick envelope. Embossed return address. Hartwell and Mason Development Group. My heartbeat roared in my ears as I carried it upstairs. I locked my bedroom door. My hands were shaking so badly I had to slice the envelope open with scissors. Inside was a single page, short, direct, written by an attorney. Mr. Hartwell is willing to undergo DNA testing at your convenience. An appointment has been scheduled at a certified laboratory. The results will be forwarded to both parties. There was a date, a time, a location. I sat on the edge of my bed, letting the letter rest against my knees, and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside me for 16 years. The test itself took less than 5 minutes. A swab, a form, a signature. I tried not to stare at him, but he was impossible not to look at. Calm, serious, precise in the way he moved. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask questions. But when the corner of his eye flicked toward me for just a second, something flickered there. Not recognition, but something close. The results came 2 weeks later, 99.9% match. My real father. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with the paper trembling in my hands, and then my phone rang. Unknown number. Local area code. I answered without breathing. Lydia, a voice said. Deep, steady, familiar in a way I couldn't explain. This is Damien Hartwell. I received the test results. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. I didn't know, he said quietly. Your mother never told me. But now that I do, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. The dam broke inside me, not with sobs, but with a sensation I'd never felt before. Safety. A strange, cautious, trembling safety. Over the next few months, we spoke rarely but meaningfully. He asked about school, about my interests, about my plans. Once I told him I wanted to study architecture or business. He said, "You'd be good at either." The first time we met in person outside the lab was at a cafe downtown. He wore a tailored coat and a soft expression that made him look almost human beneath all the wealth and the reputation. He bought me hot chocolate and asked if I liked art museums. I told him I'd never been to one. "We'll go," he said, "when you're ready." He never pushed. He always waited for me to take the next step. I started to believe he wanted to be there, not out of guilt, not out of duty, but because he saw me, not as a burden, not as a mistake, but as something real. A few months before my 18th birthday, he told me gently, "If things ever get difficult at home, you can call me." I didn't know then that I would need him sooner than either of us expected. I didn't know that the truth my mother left in that box, wasn't just about my identity. It was a weapon. And Harold had no idea I'd learned how to use it. The morning of Christmas Eve felt strangely calm, like the quiet before a storm. Snow covered our street in a smooth white sheet, muffling every sound, making the world feel softer than it really was. I woke before my alarm, heart pounding, not from excitement but from a simmering awareness that things were shifting around me. I could feel it the way animals sense an earthquake before it hits. Harold had been tense for weeks, short-tempered, pacing the hallway at night, snapping at Jenna, barking orders at Noah. It wasn't subtle. Something was brewing behind the scenes, something he didn't want anyone to know, and I suspected it had everything to do with me. But he didn't know what I knew, not yet. When I walked into the kitchen that morning, he was already there. He had the financial section of the newspaper open, pen in hand, tracing columns of numbers like he was hunting prey. Jenna hovered near the stove, stirring oatmeal with the careful precision of someone trying not to provoke a beast. Noah sat at the table in his flannel pajamas, headphones on, eyes fixed on a video. I went straight to the cabinet to grab a glass, intending to get water and slip out before Harold launched into one of his lectures, but I didn't make it. "You," he said sharply, stabbing his pen toward me without looking up. "Sit." The command echoed something from years ago, something in the pit of my stomach that tightened instinctively. I hated that he still had that effect on me. I sat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. "What?" I asked. Harold's eyes flicked up, cold and calculating. "Where were you yesterday afternoon?" "School, and then I walked home." "Did you go anywhere else?" "No." He leaned back, assessing me. "I got a call from the office at Evergreen Financial. Someone asked questions about my insurance policy." His stare pierced like a blade. "Was it you?" My pulse stuttered. I kept my expression neutral, the way Damien had taught me over the phone during one of our conversations. Never react emotionally when your opponent wants you to break. I didn't call anyone, I said calmly. You're lying. I'm not. Harold slapped the newspaper onto the table. Do not play games with me. Someone is digging into my accounts. Someone who knows enough to cause problems. Jenna flinched at his tone. Noah looked up from his iPad, wide-eyed, before lowering his head again, pretending not to be listening. I stared straight into Harold's eyes. If someone is looking into your accounts, maybe you should ask why. His jaw twitched. Don't get smart. The irony of that statement, coming from a man who had used my trust fund to finance all of Noah's extracurriculars, hit so hard I almost laughed, but I held it in. You think you're grown now, Harold said slowly, walking around with that attitude, acting like you're better than the roof over your head. He leaned forward. You should be grateful. Without me, you'd have nothing. I wanted to tell him the truth, that without him, I would have had everything my mother worked for. That without him, my trust fund would have been intact. That without him, my future wouldn't feel like something I had to carve out with bare hands. But I saved it. I saved all of it. Christmas morning would be soon enough. I stood. I'm going to finish my homework. No, he barked. You'll finish this conversation. I paused, gripping the back of the chair lightly. There's nothing to finish, I said. I didn't call your office. I didn't ask questions. I'm not digging into anything. He narrowed his eyes. But someone is. And now he was scared. And that fear tasted like foreshadowing. I walked toward the hallway. Sit down, he yelled. I kept walking. He slammed his fist on the table so hard the silverware rattled, but I didn't turn back. Jenna whispered something to him, something soft, something placating, and I heard him growl, She's lying, I know she is. I climbed the stairs with every nerve in my body buzzing. When I closed my bedroom door, I took out my phone and texted the only person who could make sense of what Harold was unraveling over. Can we talk? The reply came in less than a minute. Of course. Are you home? Yes. I'll call in too. 2 minutes later, my phone rang, Damien's name lighting up the screen. I answered with a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. What happened? He asked. He's suspicious, I whispered. He thinks someone is digging into his accounts. A pause. Then, good. Good? My voice rose. He's going to figure out I'm the reason. No, Damien said calmly. He won't, because you're not. My attorney has been reviewing his financial activity for months, and Harold is right to be scared. Another pause. He's done things that won't withstand scrutiny. My heart skipped. Like what? You'll know soon. I closed my eyes. He's getting worse, angrier, more paranoid. That means he senses he's losing control. The words felt like armor sliding onto my skin. Do you need me to come get you now? He asked gently. No, I whispered. Not yet. When you're ready, he said, I'll be there in minutes. I believed him. I didn't know how, but I did. The rest of Christmas Eve passed like a storm holding its breath. Harold barely spoke to anyone. Jenna floated through the house like a ghost, avoiding conflict. Noah stayed in his room playing video games until dinner. By the time the sky turned purple and the streetlights blinked on, the tension felt like something living beneath the walls, thick, restless, waiting. After dinner, I escaped to my room. I sat on my bed and opened my mother's letter again, letting her words ground me. You are strong enough now. I didn't feel strong. I felt like a girl in a house built on lies, counting hours until she could break free. But I held on to the letter anyway. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy, determined. They stopped outside my door, a knock, sharp, controlled. Lydia, Harold said, open up. I tucked the letter under my pillow and stood. My hands were steady when I unlocked the door. He stood there with crossed arms, eyes narrowed, breathing hard like he'd rehearsed whatever speech he was about to give. We're not done talking, he said. Yes, I answered quietly. We are. His face reddened. Tomorrow is your birthday, he spat. Don't expect gifts. Don't expect celebration. You get a roof tonight, that's it. I don't expect anything, I said. You're turning 18, he said, and you'd better start making a plan, because I'm not supporting you after tomorrow. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just looked at him through the crack of the doorway with a calm I didn't feel. I already have a plan. His eyes narrowed further. What plan? I didn't answer. I simply closed the door. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. The storm was coming. I could feel it pressing against the windows, rattling the siding, whispering under the doorframe. Sometime before dawn, I slept. By morning, Christmas morning, everything would change. The letter, the envelope, the $50 bill, the man waiting outside. And Harold, for the first time in his life, would finally understand that his control over me was gone. Completely, irreversibly gone. I woke on Christmas morning before the sun even touched the windows, before the house stirred, before Harold's anger could find a target. A pale gray light crept across my ceiling, fragile and cold, like the world was holding its breath. I lay there for a moment, staring at the faint cracks in the paint, feeling the quiet tremble in my chest. 18. The number felt too big and too small at the same time. I slipped out of bed and padded to the window. Snow had fallen overnight again, thick and powdery, blanketing Maple Hill Drive in a clean, white silence. Everything looked peaceful from my second-floor room, like a world I didn't belong to but wished I did. I spotted the black SUV parked half a block down, tucked partially behind Mrs. Kellerman's hedge. My breath caught. Even from distance, I knew it was his. Damien didn't say he was coming early, but it didn't surprise me. He'd always been more protective than he let on. I wondered how long he'd been there. I wondered if he'd slept in that car. I wondered what he thought as he watched the house where I'd spent 18 years feeling unwanted. I pressed my palm against the cold glass. "Don't come in yet," I whispered. Not until the moment was right. When I walked downstairs, the tension in the air hit me like humidity before a thunderstorm. Jenna stood in the kitchen in her faded red sweater, stirring a pot of oatmeal on the stove. Noah sat at the table scrolling on his phone, his hair sticking up at odd angles. He looked up when he heard me and gave a small wave. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," I replied. We both knew it wasn't a normal morning. Neither of us said why. Harold appeared a moment later, carrying a mug of coffee like a weapon. He didn't look at me at first. He didn't say Merry Christmas or Happy Birthday. He barely said anything to anyone. Instead, he dropped into his chair and opened the news app on his phone. 5 minutes passed in silence. Then he snapped it. "Lydia," he barked. "Sit." I had been pouring orange juice. I finished filling my glass before turning. "Why?" "Sit." I crossed the kitchen and lowered myself into the chair across from him. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp. I'd seen this expression before, when he was about to deliver a punishment, a lecture, a blow disguised as responsibility. "It's time," he said. "For what?" He reached into his wallet. For one terrifying second, I thought he was going to retrieve some document proving he'd already thrown me out on paper. But instead, he pulled out a single crisp bill, a 50. He didn't hand it to me. He threw it. It struck my cheek, fluttered to the table, then slid onto the floor at my feet. "There," he said. "That's the last money you get from me. From today on, you're done living under my roof. You're an adult. You can figure out your own life." Jenna gasped softly. "Harold!" "Stay out of it," he snapped. Noah stared at me, wide-eyed, pale. I bent down slowly and picked up the bill. My hand was calm. My heart was not. But I had learned to hide everything in that house. "You're really doing this today?" I asked. "On Christmas?" "I should have done it years ago," he said coldly. "Your mother protected you. She isn't here anymore." He wanted me to break. He wanted tears. He wanted proof his words could still bruise. Instead, I smiled. Not a big smile, a quiet one. The kind of smile that makes a bully step back without understanding why. Harold's face twitched. I reached into my jacket pocket. The envelope brushed my fingertips. I pulled it out and laid it on the table between us. "For you," I said. His eyes narrowed. "What is this?" "The truth." He hesitated. His fingers hovered, then he snatched the envelope and tore it open. As he read, color drained from his face. I didn't need to watch the whole process. I already knew every line he was reading. My mother's words, my identity, his lies. When he reached the part about draining my trust fund, his hand began to shake. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "It was my mother's," I said. "She left it for me." "You weren't supposed to know." "I know," I replied. He slammed the letter on the table. "This changes nothing. You think this gives you power over me?" "No," I said softly, "but it takes yours away." Jenna stepped back into the counter, her knuckles white on the edge. Noah looked like he wanted to disappear. Harold shoved his chair back so violently it screeched across the floor. He leaned over the table, jabbing a finger at my chest. "Listen to me. You tell no one about this. If word gets out about—" "My real father," I cut in. The kitchen went silent. Harold's mouth opened and closed like he didn't know how to form words. I slid the $50 bill into my pocket. Then I stood up. Right on cue, a car door slammed outside. Harold's head snapped toward the window. I didn't look. I didn't need to. Footsteps crunched through the snow, slow, measured, controlled. The kitchen seemed to shrink as the sound grew closer. "No," Harold whispered. "No, no, no, not him." I started toward the hallway. "Where are you going?" he demanded. "To let him in." "Don't you dare open that door." I paused and turned back to him. "I'm 18, I said. "You don't get to decide anymore." Harold lunged forward like he wanted to grab my arm, but Jenna stepped between us. "Harold, stop!" I walked toward the entryway, each step steady, sure. My hands didn't shake. My breathing didn't falter. It felt like every moment of my 16-year-old revelation had led to this single point in time, this doorway. When I reached the handle, I glanced back once. Harold was trembling. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, stinging my cheeks, lifting strands of hair off my shoulders. Snowflakes drifted into the hallway. And there he was. Damien stood on the porch wearing a dark winter coat, snow dusting his shoulders, his expression calm but resolute. His eyes, my eyes, softened when they met mine. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes." Behind me, Harold's voice cracked. "Lydia, do not leave this house." Damien stepped inside the threshold without waiting to be invited. His presence filled the space instantly, quietly, powerfully. "Good morning, Harold," he said. Harold swayed like he'd been struck. You have no right to—" "Yes," Damien said. "I do." His voice was calm, controlled, deadly. Jenna backed into the living room. Noah stood frozen behind the table, hands trembling around his phone. Harold tried to regain his posture. "You can't just walk into my house." "This isn't about your house," Damien interrupted. "It's about your choices, and the consequences they carry." Harold's face contorted. "You think you can take her from me?" Damien's gaze sharpened. "You threw her out." "That's not—" "She has a place with me now," Damien said. "A safe place, a legal place, and you will not interfere." Harold opened his mouth again, but Damien stepped forward slightly, and the words died in Harold's throat. I held my mother's letter tightly inside my pocket. The truth, my shield. Damien extended a hand toward me. "Let's go." I walked to him. Harold's voice cracked behind me. "You'll regret this." I turned at the door, meeting his eyes for what I hoped would be the last time. "Maybe," I said, "but at least now my life is mine." And I stepped out into the snow. As the cold wrapped around me and Damien opened the SUV door, I heard the sound of something breaking inside the house. Not a plate, not furniture, something else. Harold's control. Damien started the car. The engine hummed. The house faded behind us. Christmas morning had finally given me what no holiday in that house ever had. A beginning. A real beginning. The ride to Damien's building felt unreal, like I had stepped out of my own life and into someone else's. Snow swirled around the SUV as we drove, settling softly on the windshield before melting into clear rivulets. I stared out the window in silence, watching the familiar houses of Maple Hill Drive disappear behind us. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Damien glanced at me gently. "You did well." I kept my eyes on the road ahead. I didn't feel like I did well. "You stayed calm," he said. "You didn't let him bait you. That takes strength." Strength. It didn't feel like strength. It felt like exhaustion. It felt like the world had shifted under me, throwing every certainty off balance. My hands were still trembling in my lap, and I tucked them under my thighs so he wouldn't see. The city slowly emerged as we drove. Tall buildings, icy sidewalks, families walking with scarves wrapped tight. A different world from the one I'd just left. By the time we pulled into the underground garage beneath Damien's high-rise, my chest felt tight with the weight of everything I'd done and everything I'd lost. Damien stepped out, walked around the car, and opened my door. He didn't touch my arm or try to guide me. He simply stood there, offering presence instead of pressure. "You're safe now," he said. I nodded, swallowing hard. When the elevator doors closed, I stared at our reflections in the mirrored walls. We looked nothing alike in profile, but in the eyes, in the steadiness, in the tension, I saw a connection I hadn't dared to acknowledge until now. Damien saw me looking. "If this is too much too fast," he said quietly, "you can tell me. I don't expect you to adjust overnight." I took a breath. "I don't regret leaving," I said. Everything is happening so quickly." He nodded with understanding rather than impatience. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed." The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open to a hallway lined with soft lighting and polished floors. Damien led me toward a door at the end, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The apartment took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the entire living room, revealing a panoramic view of the snow-covered city. The furniture was modern but warm. Soft gray sofas, light wood shelves filled with books, a fireplace under a large framed painting. Everything was neat, intentional, lived in, without being cluttered. "This is," I whispered, "beautiful." "It's home," he said softly. "At least for now." I blinked. "For now?" "You can stay here as long as you want. A week, a month, until college starts. Longer if you choose." I turned slowly to him. "Why are you doing this for me?" "Because your mother would want it," he said. "And because I want it. Because I failed you once. I won't fail you again." My chest tightened. I didn't trust my voice to respond, so I simply nodded. He gestured toward a hallway. "There's a guest room. You can make it your own. Clothes aren't a priority today. Rest is." Before I could move, Damien hesitated. "There's something else you should know." My stomach dropped. "What?" "Richard won't let this go quietly. He's afraid of exposure, and when men like him get scared, they get reckless." My pulse spiked. "What does that mean?" "It means he might try to retaliate," Damien said calmly. "Call your school, spread lies, block opportunities. He already drained your trust fund. That alone is a legal issue." A cold shock rippled through me. "You know about that?" He nodded. "I suspected." And once I started looking into it, the evidence was overwhelming. I've had my attorney reviewing his withdrawals for months. Every stolen dollar is documented. "But why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed a full picture before presenting it to you," he said. "And because I didn't want to cause you more stress until I could guarantee protection." I sank onto the sofa, head in my hands. I don't want a legal battle. I just wanted a chance at a better life. You'll have that, Damien said, but you also deserve justice. Justice. A word that felt sharp and heavy. I wasn't sure I wanted justice. I only wanted peace. But maybe peace required a reckoning. Damien walked into the kitchen, returned with a glass of water, and handed it to me. Drink. I did, my throat tight. When we go public, he said, we'll do it on your terms, not his. I raised my eyes. Public? Yes, he said, at the charity gala next week. I stared at him, stunned. The gala? He nodded. I'm giving the keynote speech. My mind raced. Why would I go? Won't that create a scene? No, he said. It will create clarity. I set the glass down with trembling hands. I don't know if I'm ready for that. You don't have to decide today. Just rest. He walked toward the guest room and opened the door. Come, let me show you. The room was warm, cozy, with soft lighting, and a bed covered in a pale blue comforter. A small bookshelf sat against the wall, half filled with novels and blank journals. A soft rug covered the floor. It looked nothing like my room at Harold's house, and everything like a space someone cared about. I don't deserve this, I whispered. You deserve more than this, he said gently. You deserve safety, stability, opportunity. This is a start. I sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion pulling at my limbs. Damien stopped at the doorway, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Lydia, you don't have to earn a place in my life. You've always had one. I swallowed hard. I don't know how to accept that. You will, he said, in time. He left the door cracked open and stepped away, giving me space. For the first time in my life, I cried without fear of being heard. Not sobbing, not wailing, just quiet tears that slipped down my cheeks and soaked into the comforter. After I had cried myself empty, I explored the room. In the closet, I found a few basic things already stocked. Sweaters, jeans, pajamas, still with tags, not expensive, just thoughtful, practical. Things someone had prepared because they expected me, because they cared. I sank onto the rug and let my fingers trace the soft threads. This was what care looked like. This was what safety felt like. I'd never known either without strings attached. Hours passed. In the late afternoon, Damien knocked lightly on the doorframe and asked, "Up for dinner?" "Yes," I whispered, surprising myself. We ordered takeout. Thai food, simple and warm. We ate at the kitchen island under dim lights. Damien told stories about architecture, about projects he'd worked on, about how he liked building things that made people feel safe. He never once asked about Harold. He never once asked for my pain. He never once asked for explanations I wasn't ready to give. He simply shared space with me. When dinner ended, he walked me to the living room and turned on a movie, some old comedy I barely followed because my mind kept drifting to everything ahead of me. New college plans, a new guardian, a new identity, a new truth, and a gala that would change everything. By the time I went to bed, the storm outside had quieted. Snow fell softly against the windows like confetti, like a celebration. I lay beneath the covers feeling warm, something I hadn't felt on Christmas in years, maybe ever. And for the first time since childhood, I fell asleep knowing someone would be there in the morning, someone who wanted me, someone who chose me. I woke the next morning to the soft hum of the heating vent and a thin ribbon of winter sunlight slipping through the curtains. For a split second, I didn't remember where I was. The bed was too soft, the room too warm, the quiet too peaceful. Then everything rushed back. The envelope, Harold's rage, Damien's outstretched hand, the SUV pulling away from the only home I'd ever known. I sat up slowly, blinking against the light. For the first time in years, my first thought wasn't fear. It was possibility. I slipped out of bed and padded into the hallway. Damien was already awake, sitting at the dining table with a laptop open, glasses perched low on his nose, a mug of black coffee steaming beside him. He looked up when he heard me. "Morning," he said gently. "Morning." He closed the laptop. There's breakfast in the kitchen. Help yourself to anything. The thought of eating in a place where no one scrutinized how much food I took felt strange, almost rebellious. I made myself toast, grabbed a handful of berries from the fridge, and sat across from him. "We need to talk about the next steps," he said. I stiffened. "About Harold?" "Yes." "And about your future. And the gala this Saturday." I pushed a berry around my plate. "What exactly is supposed to happen at that event?" Damien studied me for a long moment, his gaze steady but soft. "I plan to acknowledge you publicly," he said, "as my daughter." My heart thudded painfully. Hearing him say the words out loud made the air feel thicker. "That's big," I whispered. "It is, and only if you want it." I hesitated. My entire childhood had been built around silence, pretending, hiding, enduring. Taking up space had always felt dangerous. But the idea of stepping into the truth, into a life not controlled by fear, felt like breathing clean air after years underground. "I'm scared," I said quietly. "Of him?" Damien asked. "Yes, and of everyone else. What if they judge you? What if they doubt you? What if they whisper?" His voice didn't tease. He understood. He leaned forward. "I will stand next to you the entire time. They won't touch you. Not emotionally, not socially, not legally." I exhaled slowly. Then, "Yes, I want it." A small smile touched his lips, an expression of pride I had never seen from any man in my life. "Good," he said. "Then let's prepare." We spent the rest of the morning going over details. His attorney, Ms. Whitlock, was already drafting a statement. Legal paperwork had been set in motion. Evidence of Harold's financial exploitation was organized and cataloged. Damien had been building this case quietly for months, long before the $50 bill, long before the envelope on the table. He had prepared for this moment even when I hadn't known it was coming. Around noon, Damien suggested a break. "I want to show you something," he said. We bundled up and took the elevator to the ground floor. Outside, the city was coated in white. The sidewalks were slushy, the air crisp. He led me to a narrow street behind the building where a construction site stood, fenced off with bright orange mesh. "What is this?" I asked. "A project," he replied. "My project." But when I looked closer, something didn't align with sleek corporate investments or high-end developments. The signs on the fence read, "Community Shelter Expansion Project, Hartwell Foundation." I turned to him. "You're building a shelter?" "A much larger one," he said. "The city's current facilities are at capacity. Winter is hardest on the people who have the least." I watched him, a lump forming in my throat. "Why show me this?" "Because I want you to see who I really am. Not the businessman in the news, not the figure Harold talks about with envy or resentment, just a man trying to fix what he can." He paused, letting his breath fog into the cold air. "And because someday, if you want, this foundation will be yours too." My breath caught. "Mine? I don't just want to give you money, Lydia. I want to give you purpose, choice, legacy." I couldn't speak. The kindness of it, the enormity, felt like sunlight hitting a bruise. He sensed my overwhelm and smiled gently. "No decisions now. Just think about it." We walked back in silence, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that wasn't shaped by Harold's limitations. Back upstairs I showered, changed into clean clothes Damien had quietly stocked the closet with, and settled into the desk in the guest room. I made a list of things I needed to do. Transfer school paperwork, update my mailing address, get my birth certificate, contact the college board about my FAFSA. The last item froze me. FAFSA. Harold was technically still listed as my parent. My chest tightened. "Damien," I called. He appeared in the doorway almost instantly. "What's wrong?" "My FAFSA," I said. "My financial aid. He's still listed. He has access to my records." Damien's jaw tensed. "Then let's fix that." He grabbed his coat, his keys, and within minutes we were in his SUV again. We drove through the city, past towering buildings and icy sidewalks, until we reached a law office. A small but reputable one. Inside, wood-paneled walls and soft lighting greeted us. A receptionist directed us to a conference room. Ms. Whitlock entered a moment later, crisp and prepared, her dark hair pulled into a low bun. "Lydia," she said warmly, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Damien has told me you're strong. I can see he didn't exaggerate." Her sincerity made my cheeks warm. "We're here to correct her FAFSA dependency status," Damien said. "Yes," she replied, opening a thick folder. "And more. I've reviewed 4 years of Harold's withdrawal records. His behavior is not only unethical, it's criminal." My stomach dropped. "Criminal?" "He withdrew funds intended solely for your education," she said calmly. "That is misappropriation of a minor's trust. He can be held personally liable for the full amount plus interest." I gripped the edge of the chair. I didn't want to ruin his life. Whitlock looked at me, her expression softening. "He already ruined his own life, Lydia. You're simply stepping out of the wreckage." Damien added quietly, "You deserve justice, not revenge. Justice." She walked me through documents, signatures, forms transferring control of my legal status, and paperwork that started the process of removing Harold's influence from my future. By the time we left the office, the sky was turning golden with the afternoon sun. Back at the apartment, Damien ordered dinner and insisted we rest. But my mind was racing. College, legal cases, the gala, the sudden shift in my entire identity. After we ate, I went to my room and curled up on the bed. I must have drifted off because when I opened my eyes again, it was dark and the city lights glittered outside like a scatter of stars. A soft knock came at the door. "Lydia?" Damien's voice was low. "Are you awake?" "Yeah," I whispered. He stepped inside. "I have news." My pulse jumped. "What happened?" He sighed, his expression unreadable. "Harold called your school." A cold rush swept down my spine. "What did he say?" "He told the administration you're mentally unstable," Damien said. "That you stole from the family and need a counselor before you're allowed back." I covered my mouth. "He's trying to destroy my reputation. He's trying to destroy your future." Damien stepped closer. "But it won't work. Ms. Whitlock already contacted the school. Their counselor reviewed your records, your behavior, your GPA. They don't believe him." My shoulders collapsed with relief. "He's scared," Damien said. "He feels the foundation cracking beneath him. Lies are the only tools he has left." I looked at him, voice trembling. "What happens now?" "Now?" He gave a small smile. "We prepare for the gala." A shiver ran through me, not fear, but something like anticipation. The world was shifting. My life was unfolding. The storm Harold thought he could bury me under was rising back toward him. And Saturday night, in a ballroom filled with the most powerful people in the city, the truth would finally break open. The week of the gala passed in a blur of preparation, nerves, and a strange, growing steadiness I didn't recognize as my own. Damien guided me through everything gently, as if he knew exactly where the ground beneath my feet was still fragile. I wasn't used to someone anticipating my needs before I even voiced them. It made me feel safe in a way that was foreign and startling. By Friday, the day before the gala, my stomach was a tight fist of anticipation. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional clink of Damien's glass as he worked at the table. Outside, snow fell in steady sheets, blanketing the city like a curtain that was slowly closing on one life and opening on another. That evening, Damien came into the living room holding a long garment bag. He set it on the back of the sofa. "This is for tomorrow," he said. I blinked. "For me?" He nodded. "A gown. Don't worry, nothing flashy. But you deserve to walk into that room feeling like you belong there." I hesitated. "Damien, I don't know if I do belong there." He shook his head, firm but gentle. "You belong anywhere truth belongs. And tomorrow, truth will be on full display. He didn't insist that I try it on right away. He just left the bag where it was, trusting I'd come to it when I was ready. I waited until he went to bed. Then I unzipped the bag slowly, like I was opening something sacred. The dress was midnight blue, floor length, with a soft shimmer that caught the light without screaming for attention. It was elegant, understated, beautiful. I slipped it on. It fit perfectly, fitted at the waist, flowing at the bottom, with sleeves that draped lightly down my arms. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like the girl Harold had belittled for years. It didn't look like someone who'd eaten alone at school lunch tables or worked part-time jobs just to afford the SAT fee. The girl in the mirror looked real. She looked claimed. She looked like someone who finally knew who she was. I touched the fabric lightly. "Mom would have loved this," I whispered. The next morning, gala day, I woke up before dawn. The sky was still dark. My nerves buzzed beneath my skin like electricity. I made tea in the silent kitchen, inhaling the steam and trying to slow my breathing. Damien entered the room rubbing his eyes, still half asleep. "You're up early." I couldn't sleep. He nodded sympathetically. "We'll take our time today. No rush." He made himself coffee and sat across from me. "There's something important we need to discuss before tonight." My heart tightened. "What is it?" "Your father, Harold, will be at the gala." I swallowed. I figured. "He'll be receiving an award. Developer of the Year." My fingers clenched around my mug. "That award is everything to him." "Yes," Damien said, "which is why tonight will hit him harder than anything else could." "That's what I'm afraid of," I admitted. "Hurting him." Damien's expression softened. "Lydia, you are not hurting him. You are not taking anything from him. He is the one who built his success on lies, theft, and cruelty. Tonight, he will reap what he sowed, not what you sowed." I sat in silence, letting the words settle. "He spent 18 years diminishing you," Damien continued. "Tonight the world will see your worth, and his downfall will be the result of his choices, not yours." I nodded slowly. "I understand." But understanding didn't erase the knot in my stomach. The rest of the day was spent quietly. Damien went over his speech one last time. "Ms. Whitlock arrived to brief me on what to expect, how the media would react, who might approach me, how to respond if anyone asked for an interview." "You don't owe commentary to anyone," she said firmly. "Let Damien handle every question." I nodded. "I can do that." At 5 o'clock I began getting ready. The dress slid over my skin like water. Damien had brought in a stylist earlier who gave me soft, natural curls and subtle makeup. When I looked in the mirror afterward, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked older or more glamorous, but because I looked like someone unburdened. Someone who didn't have to shrink anymore. At 6:30, Damien knocked on my door. "Ready?" he asked. I turned. His breath hitched for a fraction of a second. "You look..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You look exactly how your mother would have wanted you to look tonight." My throat tightened. "Thank you." He offered his arm. "Let's go." The ride to the Four Seasons felt surreal. The streets were lined with Christmas lights, casting warm gold reflections on the snow. Couples strolled past with linked arms. Children in puffy coats chased each other on the sidewalk. Life was moving around us, ordinary, beautiful, while my world felt poised on the edge of something monumental. Outside the hotel, black cars lined the entrance. Photographers milled around, cameras at the ready. Men and women in gowns and tuxedos stepped out onto the red carpet. As soon as Damien exited the SUV, lights flashed. People murmured, heads turned. Then he extended his hand to help me out. When I stepped onto the carpet beside him, the flash intensified. More murmurs, questions, confusion, curiosity. "Damien, who is she?" "Mr. Hartwell, is this your daughter?" "Is this the first public appearance?" Damien kept walking, his hand steady on mine. "No interviews tonight," he said calmly. "Thank you." Inside the hotel, the air was warm and filled with soft music from a string quartet. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. A massive tree decorated with silver ornaments stood in the center of the lobby. We entered the ballroom at 7:30. People were already gathered around the bar, sipping champagne and laughing. When they saw Damien, faces lit up with recognition, admiration, respect. And then they saw me. Smiles shifted, heads tilted, whispers spread like wildfire. But for once, none of it terrified me. We made our way to the front table. A large screen displayed the event schedule. 7:45. Opening remarks. Keynote speaker, Damien Hartwell, 8 GAC. Developer of the Year Award, recipient, Harold Fletcher, 8:30, dinner service. I stared at Harold's name. Even seeing it printed made my stomach twist. "Don't think about him," Damien said softly. "Think about why you're here." At 7:45, the lights dimmed. The host stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "please welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Damien Hartwell." Applause filled the room. Damien rose and offered me a reassuring nod before walking to the stage. He stood tall under the lights, the very picture of composed authority. "Thank you," he began, his voice strong. "Tonight, we gather to celebrate excellence in development, innovation, and community building. But before we recognize any achievements, I want to speak about something more important: truth." A murmur rippled across the room. I held my breath. "For 18 years, Damien continued, there was someone I didn't know existed. Not by choice, but by circumstance. A young woman who grew up without the support she deserved, without the truth she deserved, without the protection she deserved." Harold emerged from the crowd near the bar, champagne flute in hand. His jaw clenched when he saw me at the front table. Damien glanced at me. "That young woman," he said, "is here tonight." The ballroom fell into electric silence. "I would like to introduce my daughter, Lydia Hartwell." The spotlights turned toward me. Gasps echoed across the room, phones lifted, whispers erupted. Harold froze. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered across the floor. He stared at me as if his entire world had just collapsed. And for the first time in 18 years, I didn't look away. The silence that followed Damien's announcement felt thick enough to touch. Hundreds of faces turned toward me, eyes wide, murmurs rippling through the room like a breaking tide. For a heartbeat, I felt exposed, like a deer caught in headlights, like a secret dragged into the sun too quickly. But then my gaze locked with Harold's. He stood near the bar, frozen, champagne pooling at his shoes. His face drained to a sickly gray, jaw slack, eyes wild the way prey must look when it realizes it has been cornered. Something inside me shifted. The fear that had lived under my ribs for 18 years loosened its grip. And in its place, something steadier rose. I lifted my chin. Damien extended his hand toward me from the stage. "Lydia," he said softly into the microphone, "would you join me?" My legs trembled, but the path to him felt inevitable, like gravity pulling me into the truth. People stepped aside without being asked. Their eyes followed me, curious, stunned, evaluating. As I approached the steps to the stage, I passed Harold. He reached out suddenly, fingers twitching as if he meant to grab my arm. "Lydia," he hissed under his breath. "Stop! You don't know what you're doing." I kept walking. He lunged a half-step closer. "Don't you dare embarrass me." One of the event staff intercepted him gently, blocking his path. Harold recoiled, furious but powerless. I climbed the steps. Damien helped me up the last one, steady and warm. He faced the crowd, voice clear. "For those who may question the truth of what I'm saying tonight," he continued, "please allow me to introduce someone who has verified every detail, my attorney, Ms. Whitlock." She stepped onto the stage with a folder in hand, her heels echoing sharply in the room now silent enough to hear the soft hum of the lights. "In this folder," she announced, "are DNA results from a certified laboratory confirming with absolute clarity that Mr. Hartwell is indeed the biological father of Ms. Lydia Rivera. In addition, I hold a notarized letter from the late Marisol Rivera confirming the circumstances of Lydia's birth." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "And finally, the financial records of Mr. Harold Fletcher," she said, her tone firm. "Records showing repeated withdrawals from a trust fund established for Lydia's education. Withdrawals totaling nearly $50,000. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. I stole a glance toward Harold, his face contorted into something between panic and rage. His hand shook violently against his side. Jenna stood a few feet away, one hand over her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Noah clung to her coat, trembling. Damien rested a reassuring hand between my shoulder blades. "You're not alone," he whispered. Ms. Whitlock continued, "These funds were appropriated without consent and used for purposes unrelated to Lydia's well-being. Legal action has already been initiated." The audience murmured, judgmental, sharp, disapproving. The tide in the room unmistakably shifted. Harold had always cared more about reputation than anything else, more than truth, more than decency, more than me. And now his reputation was dissolving right before his eyes. He shoved past a table of businessmen, storming toward the stage. "You're lying!" he shouted. "All of you are lying!" Security stepped forward, but he pushed them away. "Damien," he snarled, "this is your revenge. Admit it." Damien didn't flinch. "I don't need revenge. Your own actions revealed who you are." "You don't deserve her," Harold spat. Damien's voice was calm, deadly. "You should have thought of that before you stole from her, before you left her unsupported, before you threw her out of your house." The room erupted in whispers again. Harold pointed at me, fingers trembling. "She's ungrateful. She's a liar. Enough," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The microphone carried it across the room with effortless clarity. Harold froze. "I'm not here to fight you," I said. "I'm not here to destroy you. I'm not even here because of you." I took a breath, feeling the weight of 18 years behind every word. "I'm here because I deserve the truth. Because my mother wanted this for me. Because I am no longer afraid of you, and I refuse to let your choices define the rest of my life." His face twisted, but he couldn't speak. "I'm done being invisible," I said. "I'm done being your secret." Then I stepped back, closer to Damien, closer to safety. Harold's expression cracked open. He looked small, defeated. The man who had controlled our home like a tyrant suddenly looked like a child who had lost his footing. He turned, to the audience, to Jenna, to anyone who would listen. "You all know me," he pleaded. "You know I'm a good man. This is slander, slander." But no one moved toward him. People averted their eyes, shifted away, whispered behind raised hands. Even the investors he had bragged about for years avoided his gaze. He was alone. Security approached politely. "Sir, please step outside." "No," he snapped. "No one removes me from my own event. It's not your event," the security guard said gently. "Please step outside." Harold tried to push past them, but he stumbled. The guard steadied him, then escorted him away. His voice echoed through the ballroom doors as they closed. "I'm not done. You'll regret this. Both of you." When his shouting faded, a heavy quiet settled over the room. Ms. Whitlock closed her folder. "Thank you," she said to the audience. "And thank you, Lydia, for your courage." She stepped down. Damien turned toward me, not caring about the eyes watching us. He placed both hands on my shoulders, his expression softening. "I'm proud of you," he said. Something in my chest loosened. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for years. The host nervously returned to the microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell. Thank you, Ms. Rivera. Please take your seats for dinner." But I didn't sit right away. I looked out across the ballroom, at people whispering my name, at eyes filled with curiosity, sympathy, surprise. For the first time, none of it made me shrink. I wasn't a mistake. I wasn't unwanted. I wasn't Harold's burden. I was Marisol's daughter. I was Damien's daughter. And tonight, everyone knew it. Damien guided me back to our table. Phones buzzed as news traveled quickly through the room. A woman from a charity committee leaned over as we passed. "She's so brave," I heard her whisper. "And he's so proud. You can see it." When we sat, I stared at my plate without eating. The noise around us blurred. My heart raced with a dozen emotions: relief, fear, anger, grief, hope. Damien placed a hand over mine. "You're safe," he said quietly. I nodded. "I know. But you're overwhelmed." I let out a small laugh, humorless, tired. "Is it that obvious?" "You've been holding yourself together for too long," he said. "It's okay to let the emotions come now." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. The rest of the gala passed in a haze. People approached cautiously to express support. No one dared ask invasive questions, not with Damien beside me. When the event finally ended, Damien and I walked to the car in crisp night air, snowflakes drifting down like feathers. As we drove away, I leaned my head against the window, watching the hotel fade behind us. "Damien?" I asked softly. "Yes?" "Did I do the right thing?" He didn't hesitate, not even for a breath. "You did the brave thing," he said. "And brave is always right." I closed my eyes as the city lights streaked past us. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was stepping toward something, not running from it. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew this much with absolute clarity. The girl Harold tried to break had survived, and she was finally free to rise. The morning after the gala felt strangely still, as if the world itself paused to let me adjust to the weight of what had happened. Sunlight slipped through the blinds in thin golden bands, warming the quiet apartment. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, letting the night replay in slow, gentle waves. Damien calling me his daughter in front of hundreds of people, Harold screaming as security escorted him out, Ms. Whitlock reading the truth aloud while the entire city listened. By the time I finally sat up, the heaviness in my chest had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something new, something like relief, though fragile and unfamiliar. When I stepped into the kitchen, Damien was already there. He looked tired, dark circles beneath his eyes, but he smiled when he saw me. "Good morning," he said softly. "Morning." He poured me a cup of tea without asking, placing it in front of me like he'd always known how I liked it, hot, with honey. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth settle into my fingers. "You did the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said. "I hope you know that." My throat tightened. "I'm still processing." "Of course you are." He sat opposite me, hands clasped loosely. "Today, we'll take it slow. No meetings, no calls, just rest." But the peace lasted only a few hours. Around noon, Damien's phone rang. He stepped into the hallway to answer it, voice low. I couldn't make out the words, but the tension in his shoulders told me enough. When he returned, he sat down across from me, exhaling. "That was my assistant," he said. "The Denver Business Journal published a piece about last night." I swallowed. "About me?" "Yes, and about Harold's misappropriation of the trust fund." My stomach twisted. "Is it bad?" "It's factual," Damien said calmly. "Firm, clear. People deserve the truth." I nodded slowly, gripping the edge of the table. "What happens to him now?" "There will be consequences. Legal consequences, social consequences, professional consequences." He hesitated. "Are you ready to hear them?" I wasn't sure, but I nodded anyway. Damien met my eyes. "The board of Fletcher and Lang Properties held an emergency meeting this morning. They voted to suspend Harold pending investigation." I inhaled sharply. "And," Damien continued, 2 investors who funded his latest project are withdrawing their support. My chest tightened, not with sympathy, but with the strange ache of knowing someone was collapsing under the weight of their own choices. I didn't want to ruin him, I whispered. You didn't ruin him, Damien said gently. He ruined himself. You simply stopped shielding him from the consequences. I stared down at my hands. It still feels heavy. Of course it does, he murmured. You're compassionate, you're thoughtful, but you're also allowed to protect yourself. The rest of the day was quiet. I stayed curled up on the couch, reading messages from classmates, from teachers, from people whose names I barely recognized. Some expressed shock, others support. A few apologized for never noticing what I'd been going through. I didn't respond to most of them. I didn't have the energy. By late afternoon, I stepped out onto the balcony, watching the snow fall in soft spirals over the city. The cold bit at my cheeks, but I welcomed it. I needed the clarity it brought. Damien joined me a few minutes later, hands tucked into his coat pockets. There's something we still need to talk about, he said quietly. I turned to him. What is it? Your college enrollment, he said. We need to notify them of the changes in your legal guardian status. Right. FAFSA, financial records, address updates. Do you think this will affect my acceptance? I asked. No, Damien said firmly. And if anyone tries to make it an issue, Ms. Whitlock will handle it. You don't need to worry. I nodded slowly. Thank you. For everything. He looked out over the city. I wish I could have been there earlier, for your childhood, for your mother, for you. You're here now, I said. That's what matters. We stood there in comfortable silence until the cold forced us back inside. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number. Lydia, it's Noah. Can we talk, please? My breath caught. My instinct was to delete it. Not out of hatred, but out of self-preservation. But before I made a decision, the phone vibrated again. I didn't know everything Dad was doing. I swear, I'm sorry. I set the phone down, rubbing my forehead. Noah texted me, I said quietly when Damien walked into the room. He paused. Do you want to respond? I don't know. He nodded. Take your time. You're allowed to set boundaries. I didn't reply to Noah that night. Maybe someday, but not yet. Over the next week, everything moved quickly. Harold resigned from his company. Legal notices were served. The trust fund investigation expanded. My school counselor confirmed my enrollment wouldn't be affected. Damien bought a small desk for my room, set up a study space for college prep, stocked the kitchen with my favorite foods. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, I began to exhale. Sometimes grief and growth look identical at first. Both stretch you, shake you, pull you apart. But one leaves you empty, and the other leaves you open. I was learning the difference. 3 months later, I moved into my college apartment in Boulder, a little one-bedroom with a view of the Flatirons and an old radiator that clanked at night. Damien helped me carry boxes up the stairs, laughing when he bumped his head on the low ceiling. You sure you don't want someplace bigger? He asked, sounding half playful, half concerned. This is perfect, I said. It's mine. He smiled softly and didn't argue. Classes were demanding, but I thrived. For the first time, I wasn't studying to escape something. I was studying to build something. I got a part-time job at a local real estate office, the kind with mismatched chairs and a boss who brought donuts every Monday. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. Every Sunday, Damien drove down for brunch. We talked about school, architecture, life, my mother. We talked about how relationships can be rebuilt even after long silence. Sometimes I cried, sometimes he did too. We were learning each other, slowly, carefully, honestly. And somewhere along the way, without ceremony or planning, I started calling him Dad. The first time it slipped out, he froze, eyes wide. Then he cleared his throat and said, I like the sound of that. I did too. A few months later, Ms. Whitlock called to tell me the trust fund case had been resolved. Funds recovered, damages awarded, enough to cover my tuition, living expenses, and maybe a down payment on a small place someday. The day the money hit my account, I stared at the screen for several minutes, unable to breathe. Not because of the number, but because it meant closure. Harold never apologized. He never reached out. Jenna sent a short email months later, polite, distant, unsure of whether I wanted contact. I wasn't ready, so I let it sit. Some chapters aren't meant to be reopened. Some doors stay closed for a reason. But the world beyond those doors is vast and bright and mine. Now, as I tell this story to you, I'm sitting at my little desk in Boulder, window open, spring breeze drifting in. My textbooks are scattered everywhere. My future feels wide and possible. I'm no longer the girl who counted days until she could leave. I'm the woman writing the next chapter herself. And if you're here listening, thank you, truly. Stories like mine belong to anyone who has felt invisible, unheard, or unloved. Anyone who has feared stepping into their truth. Anyone who has struggled to choose themselves. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever had to walk away from a place that hurt you. Tell me what part resonated. I read everything. And if you want more stories like this, more resilience, more justice, more truth finds its way moments, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with this channel. You're not alone. Your story matters. And I'll see you in the next one.